It's going? It's going. All right, start from the wide view.
It's on the wide view.
Okay, go to the split view. Nice. Wide view gang or split view gang?
Drop in the comments. One or two.
Actually, what I want people to drop in the comments is strength gang or hypertrophy gang.
Actually, that would be useful. Yeah.
We have
I would
polled
be
our audience in the past,
Yeah.
but I suspect it's changed because
Can you do polls in YouTube comments? Because we should do
That's
that.
a good
Because I always frame it as like predominantly strength, predominantly hypertrophy. The hypertrophy focused, strength curious, or strength focused, hypertrophy curious. There's the four categories basically. I think that's generally the four most applicable categories.
One more time.
So strength predominantly, like powerlifter.
Like, I don't care about, I'll do whatever.
Yeah. I'll do some bicep curls, but like that's it.
Or like I'll do my accessories if I have to.
Yeah. Hypertrophy primarily. So I'm not really squat, bench, and deadlift if I don't have to. Strength focused.
Yeah.
Hypertrophy curious.
Okay.
So that maybe I'll do some.
Wouldn't mind filling out the sleeves.
Yeah. I just went to a new gym. There's a posing room. Let me see what's up.
Yeah.
And then the opposite would be hypertrophy focused, strength curious.
Okay.
Oh, there's a combo rack at this. Let me see what I can bench real quick.
Which do you think is more common, the third or the fourth one?
I think for our audience, if I had to guess, skew a little bit more analytically minded. If I had to guess, I think they're going to lean towards the objectivity of strength a bit more. So I'd say strength focused, hypertrophy curious would be our audience. But on the broad scale,
I think there's.
I would flip it.
Okay.
That'd be my guess.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think that the tricky thing is that I think it's uncommon for someone interested in strength to not care at all about hypertrophy.
Sure.
I feel like everyone cares to some degree about.
Yeah, when I say
physique.
that, I more so mean like
it's just very low in the priority.
Yeah, and it's like when you really care about hypertrophy, I'm more so meaning like, all right, well, I'm trying to, make sure I'm hitting it from optimal angles. Like I'm considering my calf placement and my split, stuff like that. Like everybody's gonna do some bicep curls, but I don't really consider that as like hypertrophy curious. It's more so like how many sets of lateral raises am I getting in this week, as opposed to like I've done some shoulder work. You know what I mean?
Check.
Yeah.
I think anyway, where I was going with that is I think there's probably more people in our audience that have a hypertrophy goal than have a strength goal.
Sure.
Just because I think it's more common for someone
what
with a strength goal to have
a hypertrophy goal?
Like I'm interested in listening to content or watching content or reading content about muscle growth.
Okay.
But anyway,
it's a very concrete goal.
Okay, that's not a goal.
That's what I thought.
But I guess it's. It's relevant for us.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Anyway, that was a lot in terms of the four categories. I think that is interesting. But just to make it simple for you guys, also pay the tax of watching the video.
Yeah.
Give us some engagement. Let us know down below, hypertrophy gang or strength gang. I would like you to choose one or the other, even if you're interested in both. So if you lean one way or the other, you have to choose one or the other. Unless you're truly 50-50, you can put both.
Okay.
Or like strength and hypertrophy gang.
Sure.
I'm interested.
Okay.
But today's episode, I think, will cover everyone, which I think will be great. That's
the promise.
That's the promise. We'll see what's going on. By the time we get to the end, we're going to talk about a good amount of things that I'm not even going to worry about previewing because it's kind of all over the map.
Yep.
But before we dive in here, Zach, anything good, bad, or ugly going on with you? Any interesting?
Man, I had a pretty gnarly neck tweak this week, so if that looks a little awkward, between camera angles, that explains that.
At least you were training when you had the neck tweak.
Yeah. No, it's like one of those like ones where it's not a big deal. It's just like, that's going to be something I have to deal with for this week, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's really the most pressing thing in my life at the current point in time. I'm trying to think. Oh, I got a new rocking chair. That was pretty
Let's go.
big development.
Where's the rocking chair?
So I put it in our little
bit.
back little strip there, like the little outside look area.
Oh, nice.
Anyone that knows me super well knows I'm a big rocking chair guy. Like, I think, for the longest time, ever since, you start thinking about, goals in life, things like that, I've wanted two things. I wanted a porch that with a nice overlook, and I've wanted a really, really nice rocking chair. Those
for the porch.
Yes. Those have been two big aspirations.
What's your RPM, your rocks per minute?
So, I mean, I could go into details about rocking chairs because there's a lot of things like you really got to consider. Like, you got to consider what I consider like the pitch of the rocking chair. So there's an optimal angle at which you're sitting for maximum comfort. It's a little bit too upright. It's less of a relaxing posture, and it's more of like, I'm here, I'm sitting for a reason kind of. I'm waiting for something as opposed to just relaxing in the moment. So the pitch has got to be right. This one's a little too upright. The other thing is the range of motion that you get on the rock. It's also very important. So the deeper the rock itself, the more relaxing it is. But if you go too far, now I kind of feel like I might tip over.
That's like a length and partial.
A little too much anxiety, so that's got to be right. And then obviously the last one is the breadth of the seat, like how much space am I working with, and then also the cushion of the seat. See, all these things have. Do
you want it to feel like a hug, or do you want like?
See, that's the thing. It's different strokes, different folks, right? Like for me, I like I don't like a super cushiony seat because I almost feel like that's almost more uncomfortable in the end, particularly for sitting for long periods of time.
I imagine all rocking chairs is wooden.
Some, but that's what I mean. You can have a nice kind of a rubber seat on top of the actual wooden seat. So there's a lot here, man. This is a big topic. But long story short, we're working with a rocking chair at this point. It's been something I've been keeping my eye on. To try to get one, so I have one now. So that's been a big upgrade to the morning routine. Getting in, a couple reps in the morning. Just getting there, sitting, rocking, looking outside for a little bit, just a little present. I know you're a big meditation guy. We all have our own way of getting that done. And for me, this is my new addition. So yeah, that's big news in my life. That's
glad
really,
to hear a neck tweak in a rocking chair. Let's go.
Baby.
I tweaked my neck pretty bad in 7th grade.
Oh, okay.
I was on the bus and headed to school, and the cool kid, honestly, in hindsight, I don't know if he was messing with me or what, but he pointed to something out the back of the bus and was like, hey, look at that. And I wish I could remember exactly what it was. But anyway, I looked really quickly, and
whiplash.
Yeah. I tweaked my neck really bad.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, that day at school was the day that we had team pictures for basketball. It was so bad, dude. I was like,
you're hitting the one with the ball, and you're trying to look. Yeah.
So both in my individual pictures and the team pictures,
so sweet.
I'm fighting hell to keep my head straight. And I don't think I was fully successful, but you could just see the pain in my eyes. But yeah, I had to go to the school nurse.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was really, really painful.
Yep.
So neck tweaks are not fun.
Nope.
Which would you rather have, a neck tweak or a back tweak?
Ooh, that's another good question. So I'm trying to remember a back tweak. I feel like a back tweak, you can at least get in a position where it's comfortable to sleep. A neck tweak, for me, because you're actively having pressure on the pillow, it's always uncomfortable. It doesn't matter where you roll.
If you want to support the show, you can do two things. The first is you can comment hypertrophy gang, strength gang, or both gang below.
Back tweak, neck tweak.
No. Don't comment that. That's weird. But you can click our Alibaba rocking chair link in the description. You can also check out mypillow.com / Zach Robinson.
There you go.
For your various rocking chair and musculoskeletal tweak needs.
Yep.
I was hoping you were going to bring me some, really good stuff from a professional perspective.
Yeah.
In my world, I got 3 people competing within the next. Well, one of them is a midweek meet, so it's within the next week or so of recording this, and so I was finalizing some attempt selection this morning. And I was also pairing that with some of my personal experience recently and some of our discussions about your personal training and just how we're generally approaching that based on our goals, which have been I'd say shifting over the last like few years, and then what our clientele are. So in my case, for one of the 3 meet preps, it's just going incredible. I mean, the guy's so incredibly gifted that it's easy for gifted athletes to make coaches look good. I think that's always worth remembering. But in the other 2 cases, they're both folks that I've been working with for many, many years. And I would say for both of them, I often like to think about the block before the final block as like really setting the stage for attempt selection. So the way that I will typically structure it, this varies a bit, is about 4 to 5 weeks out, that's when you're going to hit your heaviest stuff of the prep. Now, that's not to say you're training light the next few weeks, but I'm okay with, a 9.5 or a 10 RPE 4 to 5 weeks out. And then I typically follow like a wave loading structure for powerlifters, such that the week after that we pull back quite a bit, and then we more or less linearly scale up going into the meet, strike when the iron's hot on the platform. Anyway, for 2 of the 3 guys, the block before the final block that they're in right now went okay, but not great. Like I wasn't stoked with the performances. However, they've both had really good blocks so far. Knock on wood, they're both in their taper weeks. So far, so good. And I'm optimistic they're both going to PR their totals in multiple lifts each. And specifically, I wanted to hone in, and I think this will lead into some of our personal discussions as well. I had one guy that, for one of those guys, I did make some like pretty granular programming tweaks within the last 2.5 weeks or so of the meet prep to try to really express top end strength in like, it was like the way I had it programmed was like a soft second attempt. So like a single at like 8.5 or so. And I had like a load selection in there. And again, like I said, the end of the block before the final block did not go great. The first couple weeks of the next block also did not go great. So we're talking like 4 or 5 weeks out. And I was like, man, I really want him to feel something good going into the meet. So I messed around with things a little bit. Specifically, I took some of his squat hypertrophy work and put it earlier in the week because his primary day is later in the week. So I kept the overall dosage the same. And the goal was to get him to feel a really solid squat day. So like a very minor taper for that one session. It's not going to have like an overall taper effect such that he like peaks early, but just give him, half an RP off of what it would have otherwise been, a little bit of momentum, a little bit of confidence going into that taper. And it worked really, really well. Now, of course, he could have had a great session in the absence of that, but that is a case where I was able to look at multiple meet preps before that where we followed a similar structure, and from a very performance-driven lens, I at least feel like I have control over training and performance a good amount such that we can make these really granular tweaks that I would like to believe can be the difference between, hitting that third attempt on the platform and not. So any questions on that? And then I'm curious what you think about that approach, specifically as it relates to like very high levels of structure and rigidity versus a lack of structure and rigidity. Because you have some clients where you feel like structure can be almost work against you in some ways, and there are some pros and cons there and various things. So I'll let you take it from here and deal with the mess I just made.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is like, man, the sobering realities of, like you said, just struggling with the idea of like how much control do we really have. Yeah. It's such an interesting conversation because, you can put your scientist hat on and you can go down some dark thoughts on like what can I influence, what can I know? Is this variability in performance that I'm seeing because of a change I made? Is it entirely due to confounding sources of variability that would have happened otherwise, like you said? That's helpful to keep in the back of your mind, I think. But obviously there's there's a certain, like, here's an example that may be kind of off the walls, but similar in kind of how I feel about it is like, I find like discussions about like free will about very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to practically living your life, to some degree, you have to act
You're going to act like you have free will.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're going to have to act as if it exists. And I think that's kind of how you approach coaching, is that there very likely are a lot of influences that are outside of your control that make knowing whether what you did actually influential on the outcome. The truth of that is hard to know, but to some degree, you have to act as if it does make a substantial influence. Like, go ahead.
I was going to make a joke that I think only my brother would understand.
Okay.
I was going to say I act as if he exists, but I actually think a lot of people will understand that reference.
Yeah.
So anyway,
continue. I mean, it's like there's a lot of things in life that are similar to this. But yeah, so that's like kind of my philosophical answer on like just this entire bag of worms in general. Can of worms, geez, bag of worms.
I really like that analogy. Not the can of worms. That was weird, but the like free will analogy.
It's really what it is. Like,
but okay, here maybe I'm teeing up what
Sure.
the direction you were about to go is like, if you take that too far, like I have full control, and we need to, always do our heaviest squat 13.46 days out from competition, and I need to have this pre-workout, and I need this playlist playing.
Yep.
There's maybe some downsides to that.
To keep it in the free will like analogy, it's like, again, this is a conversation. We are not philosophers by any means, and this is kind of something I'm cursily interested in. But like, to some degree, like the kernel of truth, I guess, that I think of that conversation is like, there are some things that are likely deterministic and out of people's control. And I think those, if you view them all as entirely your choice or entirely something you could have done otherwise, like someone's upbringing, for example, like that is a very strong influencing factor on their behavior and things like that. And just acknowledging that there's probably some things that are kind of out of your hands that influence your behaviors in ways you're not even realizing. And I think that's similar to coaching in the sense that, yes, there are probably things we can take into our own hands and make changes that result in things that we think are related to those changes. But at the same time, there's probably a big bucket of things that are kind of out of our control that are important to keep in mind. Like you said, like every single little thing that you're changing, that's probably taken a little bit too far. So with that preamble out of the way, and hopefully hopefully that is at least helpful to some degree. It's an interesting question and kind of problem to deal with. And ultimately, I view these things on a much higher level than I used to, I think, in terms of like, I view it less as like, okay, this little individual change is like somehow categorically different than another individual change. And it's more so like, there's probably one or two or three like very grandiose overarching principles that individual changes help kind of abide by. And that's kind of how I think about it, is like, I'm struggling to articulate it entirely from like a high level perspective, but it's like, I don't think individual changes are like right or wrong, if that makes sense, in a lot of cases. And there's so many different shades and colors and ways you can achieve a similar overarching principle of like managing training stress better, allowing you to accumulate more training stress. Like there's just so many different ways to accomplish that outcome that I don't view any individual decision necessarily as right or wrong. Obviously, if it results in a positive outcome and that repeatedly happens over time, you're probably onto something in the way that you're making those decisions. So is that at all helpful in the first place before I kind of get to the second part of the question?
What I'm hearing is there's multiple roads to Rome.
Yeah.
There's multiple ways to achieve the higher level principle.
Exactly.
So to be more specific, the example that I'm using as a jumping off point is primary squat days are on Saturday, and secondary days are on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
No, actually, we pushed it to Wednesday. So he has a Monday session, a Wednesday session, and a Saturday session. I remember this off the top of my head, so I might be off by a day. But primary day is Saturday. Secondary day is Wednesday. And then he also has some deadlift work on Monday. So what I did was I took some of his accessory work from Wednesday and pushed it to Monday. So I kind of like front loaded some of the training stress in the week.
Which is like that's exactly kind of what I was gonna get at.
There's multiple ways I could have gotten there.
Exactly.
Right. And that's just like there's nothing magical about the fact that I took a few leg press sets and put it up there.
And now I'll get to like exactly the thing that we've been talking about. It's like so effectively what you did is you redistributed the training stress to account for some performance you wanted to prioritize, or maybe
primarily for psychological reasons.
Reasons, for variability in his own recovery. There's a variety of reasons you could have made that change.
And sometimes just the
change itself is motivating.
Change itself, like coach is watching, and
exactly.
Like,
and so we kind of got into this discussion of just like super high level like training discussion in terms of like the balance between structure and flexibility, or rigidity and flexibility. And I think I've had a lot of different views on this the more that I've had what I would consider maybe non-standard coaching clients. So, you know, I've coached a lot of people over the years. I'd say the majority of them were what you would consider like probably like intermediate lifters, you know, looking to really break that next echelon of like really getting to that advanced level and trying to really reach the peak of their, you know, their genetic potential kind of thing. But mostly in that intermediate realm. I think you run into areas where it requires pretty come to Jesus kind of conversations on the way that you're making decisions when you get to one of two areas. One, when somebody's extremely advanced and they've hit a plateau. That's kind of the first example, is like, all right, what are my principles to help us continue to make progress when I'm also facing the dragon of the linear log curve of adaptation, where we're reaching the point where the expectation is may not be there's much more room to go, kind of thing. That's kind of the first case.
Are you willing to train your tail off to put 5 to 10 kilos on your total this year?
Exactly. That's like case A. The other case, and this is the case that I've had a lot of experience with more recently, is maybe someone who isn't necessarily at that point of their genetic potential, but the external constraints that they're dealing with effectively get them to a similar position. So these are people with extremely chronic injuries. These are people with very limited time to train, but still want to make progress. These are people with, you know, other types of health disorders and things like that kind of conflict with their goals. And effectively, you have an external constraint situation that make the person, their advancement accelerate essentially, so that progress is much harder to come by. And I've had a few of these situations recently, whether they be chronic injuries, like I said, whether it be someone with time availability issues, a couple of very interesting like health related things as well. And I've come to kind of the position that structure and things like that can be both a extreme positive thing in a lot of cases. And I think that that can be something that gets a lot of people to the next level, is having some degree of structure, some degree of predictability to their training. But I also think there comes a point where that can be something that effectively works against you. So I'll paint this as a kind of an example. So we're kind of bred as powerlifters to be very type A, very analytical, very structured with your training. You know exactly the weights you're going to hit on week 2, week 3, week 4. You have your progressions planned out. A lot of these things are like very, very, penciled in, for lack of a better word. Like the
detail oriented.
Yeah, detail oriented. The lines around the blocks are very, very clear. However, obviously, the case for auto-regulation itself has been made abundantly clear. I'd say almost all powerlifters or people in kind of our niche are training with RP, RAR, and they're integrating some of these auto-regulatory strategies to account for fluctuations in their life stress and things like that may affect your day-to-day performance. However, I think I've grown to appreciate that is really, and we've kind of made the analogy between like the coarse and the fine dial a couple times, and I've grown to appreciate that I really think that is just the fine dial, and in certain scenarios it's just not sufficient. And by having this kind of training culture that breeds this very detail-oriented, analytical, this is the plan kind of mindset, I think it removes your, for lack of a better term, like just inherent intuition on sometimes what the correct training decision is. And obviously, this is where, I mean, the balance of structure and flexibility is that main thing. Someone who's very early on in their training career, they're not going to know what effective flexibility looks like. They're not going to know how to make those decisions in a intelligent way. But as I've gained, or as I've grown to appreciate how training is probably operating more on these kind of really high level principles, and there are no super right or wrong like individual decisions on like, I did well with safety squat bar, I can't do high bar, those kind of things. I've kind of abandoned a lot of those beliefs. I've grown just to appreciate how much that flexibility can be leveraged to your advantage in a lot of cases. So kind of coming back to a practical example is like, you have like a powerlifter who is one of these more chronic injury individuals, and sometimes there are just fluctuations in your life, training stress, what have you. I don't know the exact combination of factors, but I believe it to be the best decision to strongly deviate for whatever is planned for that day. And that's not just changing the training loads. And I think people talk about that.
It's more than just like, yeah, of course I'm changing based on the RP7 prescription.
Yeah.
You're talking about something bigger than just, load auto regulation that most powerlifters
exactly. And I think if you were to talk to lifters from like 50 years ago, like it's kind of just the whole listen to your body thing, but it's something that I haven't super well like formalized into like a process on how to go about it. But I just think it's just
there's a skill for sure.
Yeah. And it's just an overwhelming thought that I had that like, and the example I've thought about to kind of try to articulate it a little bit and poke holes in it as you see fit, but just I've been trying to figure out a way to articulate it in a better way. It's kind of like calorie intake is kind of the thing that I've used as like an example. A lot of us kind of just assume if I eat the same mean calorie intake every day, that will effectively allow me to get to my nutrition goals, which I don't think is a bad assumption.
So if your target is 2,800 calories.
Eat 2,800 calories every single day. Do that for a month. You're probably going to have the net result in your body weight in whatever direction you want that to be.
Sure.
Great. Check the box. Awesome. However, every individual day, obviously, our energy expenditure is not directly meeting up with that. The degree to which that fluctuates, I'm not really using for this example, but just bear in mind for the example that like your energy expenditure is not directly 2,800 every single day. So every single eighth day that you eat 2,800 calories, some days you're in a mild surplus, some days you're in a mild deficit or what have you.
Or you're changing the magnitude of the surplus
deficit. Exactly. Yeah, sorry, that's actually a better example. You're either up or over your target. Yeah. And on net, you're where you want to be. But if you zoom in on any individual day, you're actually not hitting the quote-unquote target accurately. And it may be that the calorie needs of those individual days are actually different based on what's occurring in that individual day. And so when you put this into the context of training, I view that pretty similarly at this point, is that like we have structure and we have all these systems in place because the kind of the normal level of training stress we want to deal with to get the results that we want is something we can utilize. But in very extreme cases, whether that be super advancement or some of these non-standard training scenarios, I think the fact that you're kind of overdoing it, underdoing it in any individual session can kind of have some ramifications. And then further extrapolating the analogy, like macronutrient intake, I think a lot of people are willing to be flexible with their proteins, carbs, and fats a little bit day to day. Obviously, they have some targets, but they're, particularly carbs and fat, I think there's a little bit of more willingness to be flexible with those things. But for training, we're not willing to do the same thing. We're not willing to be flexible with our rep ranges. We're not willing to be flexible with our exercise selection. And so I don't really have a super neat takeaway from this other than I've just grown to appreciate that we put ourselves in a box in a lot of cases with respect to training and training prescriptions, and make things pretty nice and neat and try to abide to them perfectly in all scenarios with minor adjustments, but potentially not as much adjustments as we should make. For some people, that level of structure ends up being a massive net positive. And I think that's probably the vast majority of people. Having a training program can help you get to the gym, help you execute it effectively, help you get all the principles that we know are based on effective training, helps you adhere to all those things. But in some cases, I think that the kind of the line that I wrote down is that essentially in some cases I think that structure can give the illusion of precision in the training intervention that isn't actually there.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that like makes sense or any like follow-ups.
I have so many thoughts. I think this is a really interesting discussion because we coach people virtually these days. And I think a lot of people listening to this have a virtual coach or coach people virtually or both. And that lends itself quite well to putting numbers in cells such that you are like, that is one of the main deliverables. Whereas something that I've definitely changed over the last 5, 6, 7 years is a much more like a greater focus on the skill of training.
Yep.
So you mentioned someone that is, quite advanced in terms of training, or they have some other constraint, whether it's an injury constraint or a time constraint, or they're, just really deep into their training career. So one of the guys, this is separate from the guy where I was talking about just redistributing the training stress. The other guy that's in meet prep, he's 49. And, hey, quick little plug. He started on some of our lower cost programming products, and he got started in his mid-40s. I think he was probably 46 when he started with DDS. Now he's 49. He has put on like 200 pounds on his total, and he's been training his whole adult life, and he's now hitting numbers raw that he hit in reps when he was like in his 30s. So he's put almost 100 pounds on his squat, which is crazy. So shout out to him. But anyway, looking at his program, it's a lot more note heavy than it used to be.
Yep.
So like, it's, hey, instead of just like, we're going to hit a single at RP8 today, it's, hey, we're going to hit a single. Here's a cap in terms of load or RPE, but I want you to auto-regulate quite a bit based on the readiness, based on just general readiness. And then there are clear days that are priority where we want to push, even if you don't feel quite as ready for it. And what I often say to clients is like, the structure is there to keep you honest and to push you, right? Because if you have a program that says, hey, after you do your top set and 2 back offs, you got to do your stiff leg deadlifts for 3 sets. Whereas you might not otherwise do that if you're just really being flowy with it. So the structure kind of keeps you honest. The program kind of keeps you honest. But I also say, don't be a prisoner to the program. Yep. I say that all the time because if you're a prisoner to the program and you don't leave any room for training skill, you're almost certainly not actually being as precise as you think.
Exactly.
So in the case of nutrition, I don't think you're using the example of nutrition to say that, oh, you should like auto-regulate your calorie intake a bunch. Because in the case of nutrition, if you're targeting a 500 calorie deficit, and some days you're in a 300 calorie deficit, and some days you're in a 700 calorie deficit, it's not that big of a deal.
Exactly.
There's no like huge downside to that. But in training, there is, such that if we use that analogy of a deficit, if the general target is a 500 calorie deficit, but then you're in a 1,000 calorie deficit from a training perspective, someone deep into their career 2 weeks out and, they weigh less than 200 pounds, they're putting over 500 pounds of their back,
yep.
That precision does matter.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the like flexibility and the encouragement to use the training skill to stray from the structure, that's in a lot of ways less precision. So I think coaching is like strategically using structure and rigidity and also encouraging a straying from structure and rigidity. And I often tell folks, hey, this is the best I can put on paper. I expect you to stray from this at times. Let me know when you stray from it in your thought process, and I will give you feedback so we can continue to develop that skill. So I started this ramble by bringing up the fact that we do things virtually, because if you did things in person, you would definitely be like more flowy with it. Now, in this case, I'm not synchronously there with my lifters, and most online coaches are not synchronously there with their lifters, which is a downside. But, the trade-off there is coaching is a lot more reasonably priced as a result of that. They're not with you for, 4 to 10 hours per week synchronously while you're training. But anyway, I do think that's just worth reflecting on. I'll give another example on the other side of the aisle with hypertrophy. Shout out my guy, Trevor. I've been working with him for probably a similar amount of time, probably since 2021 or 2022. And he started interested in both strength and hypertrophy. He hit some big strength PRs. These days, he's all about hypertrophy. And he lives in a foreign country for like most of the year, but he's from Canada, and he spends like a few weeks at a time, a couple times a year in Canada visiting family. And when we first started working together, again, this is something that I would go back and change, is that I tried to keep a lot of structure when he was traveling, when in reality, he's popping around from town to town, city to city, in Canada, visiting a bunch of people, different gyms. Whereas now, I just give him instruction about like some things to keep in mind to like stray from the structure. And I also trust that he knows what productive training feels like because we've been doing it together for years and years. So like I'm almost in a lot of ways like more hands off, which is probably nice for him. He doesn't have to listen to me like adjusting his program every week. But I think that's actually going to lead to better outcomes and in a lot of ways more precision, because I'm saying, hey, I want you to lean on these skills that you've developed and the fact that what it feels like to do those 3 more sets of stiff leg deadlifts when you don't want to, and then report back to me, and we'll learn from it and keep that in our back pocket going forward. And like in his case, we basically have like a general flow of training sessions, but I said, hey, some weeks if you're jet lagged because you're traveling halfway around the world and you're visiting family and you're prioritizing that, and you only get in the gym twice within a calendar week, all good, just pick up where you left off. And then if the next week you can get 5 in and you feel okay by the time you get to that 5th session, you feel like you're not going to dig yourself into a hole such that the next week you can only get 2 or 3 in because you dug yourself into a hole, that's okay. And this all stemmed from the fact that me and you are, I would say, mostly training for hypertrophy these days. I think you still have some strength goals. I still have some strength goals. I'm just deprioritizing them while I cut. But anyway, I'd say you're a lot more flowy with training, a little bit less structure, whereas I am very, and I think it's just my personality type, very rigid about like the exact same equipment settings, all that good stuff. And that's something I'm like kind of trying to work on as well. And I think it is like just for coaches and lifters to think about this is actually could be a really big unlock. You have a high level lifter that, came to you because he had issues tolerating sufficient training. And if you just, your program design and your coaching was filling in numbers or values into cells, there's no way you would have achieved success. Yeah. It is encouraging the skill of training beyond just like writing the perfect program. So I think this is something I'm always keeping in mind recently, because I think it's key, and I think this is what like just really good coaches can and should do. And now that we've been doing this DDS thing for a while and not quite approaching 10 years, but 10 years is on the horizon of coaching. It's like, hey, got to do everything you can to be the best coach possible. I think this is a really important one that I've been keeping top of mind. Yeah,
I mean, you brought up a few examples. First note I wrote down was I've actually seen tons of virtual PT at the gym recently, which I just thought was fascinating.
What do you mean by that?
So somebody will be in the
they're
gym
on the phone?
and they'll be on the phone with the trainer.
That's pretty cool.
Interesting. Yeah, I've seen that recently, and I was very surprised by that. So you mentioned that. I just thought that was super interesting.
I don't think that's really common in our niche.
No. It was more Gen Pop, but I just thought that was really interesting.
I wonder if they're doing like a group thing.
It was one-on-one, it looked like. So yeah, the trainer was like dressed up in a polo, and he was like talking to the client through his headphones, like while he was training.
That's pretty cool.
And I've seen him there multiple times. Interesting. The other thing I wrote down was shout out to John Kiley. He has a lot of kind of meta papers on training, periodization, things like that. And there's one example he always kind of talked about, kind of in the context of periodization, but kind of training, planning, flexibility, these kind of things. And he would always talk about kind of more in a team sports setting. Sometimes they could tell adjustments that need to be made to the program based on just like the chatter and warm-ups and things like that. And those are like the examples of like things that obviously you can't know whether that's the right decision or not, but like so many strength coaches from like very high level athletes will mention things like that about those tactile examples where you just will adjust things on the fly when you're working with somebody in person. And I think those are important to keep in mind. It's not like those things just go away because you're working with somebody virtually and you kind of have this allure of stability. I send them the check-in on Saturday. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just kind of like
programs up.
Yeah. The process is, I think, encourages that just like that allure of structure, stability, rigidness, because as a coach, you have life. So you want to systematize when the check-ins go out and when the way the programs look and just like kind of all these things. So that's just like a kind of an interesting thing I wrote down. But like, yeah, like the number one thing I could just agree with so much is like programs to me, like the training prescription is obviously important and that's going to meet the client where they're at and based on their goals and their needs and everything. But like you said, for me, the description of those training, like exact same training prescription, but describing that to somebody to make sure that they understand the intention behind it and developing that training skill. That's like something I've almost addressed with every one of my clients now is like I have a very, very long conversation with them because of my experience with some of these a little different cases is like the goal of this initial couple blocks is more so to get on the same page about the skill of training, developing it. Every time that we reach a case where that needs to be discussed, like you said, it's more about talking about their thought process and helping them through that decision-making process to develop it for the future. Yeah. Because all those skills, I really think like, we don't have an unlimited amount of time to chase these kind of goals and things like that. And I think being able to be agile with those things when you need to be, to keep taking steps forward, I think is really, really important. Yeah. But yeah, like you said, there's a balance between structure and flexibility. I kind of think about the structure as like making sure that we're getting in those average level of calories that we have to meet our goals. But you
should look back at the last 6 months and be happy with the average workload or the average calorie intake or the average body weight change.
Exactly. Yeah. But the individual sessions and things like that, I think, obviously depending on the circumstance, and I think the cases, like you said, where somebody's traveling all the time or has a really erratic schedule, maybe they're a ER doc or something like that. These kind of niche examples, they help to expose the thinking that can potentially bias the more structured cases. Like I'm not saying for somebody who has an extremely predictable lifestyle, a college kid where their routine is the same, like everything's the same. They're inherently going to bias more towards structure.
And I was just gonna say, sorry to cut you off, but I'll just interject here, that is one caveat I would add is like, if you do have the luxury of structure, take advantage of it and don't view this as like a reason to be like, oh, I'm tired, so I'm going to skip the gym. In a lot of ways, like, honestly, a lot of powerlifters tend to be on the younger side, and they kind of have this.
I don't think the structure is inherently what's beneficial, but it's the fact that their lifestyle permits that structure. That's kind of what I think it is. It's like, in theory, if they were maybe had a very principle-based way of auto-regulating rep ranges, volumes, exercise selection, and they also have extremely stable external variables, I don't think that's necessarily worse. Yeah. Honestly, you could make an argument it might be better. We're not really sure. But what often happens is that I can train with this level of structure because my externals are dialed in, and it's almost a positive.
Maybe it's not the structure itself.
And it's a positive feedback loop. I know I have to squat on Monday, so I'm going to make sure my sleep's dialed in, my nutrition's dialed in. You can't be the type of person that is engaging in the flexibility because you're lacking on the other things. That's not the way the arrow should go. It's the fact that there are some, degree of this external situation that I just fundamentally cannot control no matter what I do, even though I'm trying my best to do so, that I must engage in the flexibility.
And the flexibility has to go both ways too, right? It's not just an excuse to slack off. It's also an excuse to push harder at times and just as often as you're kind of pulling back. And you need to not to be like gatekeepy, but I do think there's value in like, yeah, just learning what it feels like to get through week 8 of a program where you felt really fatigued in week 6.
100%.
You know,
100%.
And then, but I'm gonna try to bridge us to the next topic, and I adjust our outline a bit, so hopefully that's cool. I moved that blue part up.
Okay.
Cool with that?
Yep.
Because I think that leads in nicely here, and we can quickly cover this. Yeah, there is kind of, I think, this structure can give you this illusion of precision that you mentioned. Again, there's pros and cons of structure, like you said. But keep in mind that a lot of powerlifters, for a lot of people, it is a phase of their lifting career. I think it's really cool. Like I mentioned, my master's lifters that have just been doing that their whole adult life. That's awesome. That's like their fitness endeavor of choice. And that's really cool. But for a lot of people, it does end up being a phase that they can prioritize in a certain period of life where they have less responsibilities. And like you said, it might not be the structure itself that's leading to these coaches urging a ton of structure and precision in their microcycle design, but instead it's the lifestyle itself that's allowing that to actually occur. Exactly. And something that, at the risk of sounding self-congratulatory here about data-driven strength, something that I am really, really glad me and you and our coaches, Jake and Drake, have a good perspective on is we don't pigeonhole people into powerlifting. We actually have these days a pretty good mix between like powerlifting only, physique/lifestyle only, or a balance of the two. And the reason I say that is because another thing that you might not pick up if you are just really standardized with like communication and program delivery and feedback is that people's values do change over time. And I try to be very proactive and just notice the things that they bring up, right? Maybe when they get going and they're really into powerlifting, they talk about certain things, they use certain terms, and they approach their training a certain way, whereas that might shift over time, and we can have those discussions. And again, something I'm really proud of at DDS is we don't pigeonhole people into, hey, we're going to design your training to maximize your powerlifting total. Instead, we can do that for sure, but we can also, get really good results for someone that's just interested in physique or anywhere along that spectrum, or someone that, just wants to explore the other side of the aisle, or they need to pull the dial back because they're in residency right now. Whereas I don't think that's always the case out there. And because of our perspective of working with both powerlifters and bodybuilders, or, just physique-focused people, and then everywhere in between as well, is I think there's things that each side can learn from each other. And again, on our end, this allows our coaching approach to evolve with the lifter's values and preferences and interests as they go, and to have good, productive conversations about that, not to be flippant with those changes, but instead intentional, thoughtful, and using the coach's expertise to understand the pros and cons and the investment required for an outcome that they're interested in. So let's start with some things that powerlifters do well that bodybuilders could learn from, and then we can flip the script. So I think the number one thing that powerlifters do well that bodybuilders could learn from, or just folks interested in physique goals, is being performance and logbook oriented. Okay, so they of course have these core lifts: squat, bench press, and deadlift. They know their PRs, right? You ask them, and they have their gym numbers, their competition numbers, and maybe that one bench press they hit where it was touch and go and their butt came up a little bit. So they might start with the ladder and then they'll work their way back. And I think that's great because kind of similar to the structure that a training program inherently gives you is it keeps you honest, right? And it pushes you to get those 3 sets of stiff leg deadlift in after you've done your main deadlift for the day that you don't really want to do, but you need to do. In the case of being performance and logbook oriented, if you know what your best is, it gives you a challenge to meet. And I think humans are really good at meeting challenges, or really good at seeing a finish line or seeing a bar and reaching it. Not to step too far outside of our lane, but someone breaks an endurance record like the first 4-minute mile or whatever, and then you see a bunch of other people beat it, or you have a deadline for work and you get a lot more juice and a lot more motivation, and you become a lot more efficient at getting that work done. I think there's a lot of similarities and parallels there with like just the logbook aspect of things. And as a result, to kind of keep them honest, there's more psychological readiness for training, right? Sometimes this can be taken too far, and as you'll see in this conversation, a lot of these things are a double-edged sword. But I do think it's generally a positive that powerlifters are performance and logbook oriented. They're going to ensure physical and psychological readiness for their training, and they have a bar for themselves that they're looking to beat. That is far and away the thing that powerlifters do well that I think bodybuilders could learn from. Anything to add to that one, or does anything else come to mind? I think that is like just
for the most
key.
part, that's the biggest thing, I think. I would say the other thing that comes to mind, just in kind of following with that, is just like quote unquote like pacing stuff that you've mentioned a good amount. Like ultimately, we've talked about this a lot. Like just like the basic example of like if someone just like took every set to failure but they didn't really log versus someone who consistently logs. I think there is still that aspect of like pacing that you'll probably never quite achieve the same level of progression in the lift or whatever.
Pacing within a session or week to week?
I more so mean it like I don't know if you'll be able to achieve the same performance on a given day unless you kind of have that nudge to say like, no, like you have to try for 110 kilos or whatever it is. Like, even
so you're saying pacing in the sense that like, if you don't have like a very basic example is the presence of spotters.
Yes. Exactly.
In the sense that if there are spotters
perception
there,
of effort maybe is a better way
or
of
perception of effort. Basically, it's easy to convince yourself that something is hard when you actually have more in the tank.
Yep.
And pacing is basically the phenomenon. Like if you have a 20-set quad workout versus a 4-set quad workout, you better believe that first set in the 4-set quad workout is generally going to be higher performance because you only have to do it 3 more times, not 19 more times. That's the example of pacing.
That could bias your load selection, et cetera. Like despite the fact that your objective performance was trending XYZ thing. So point being, like, I think there was a phase I think in the community where logbooking was a little looked down upon. Like maybe not the right way to say it, but
pendulum swings.
Yeah, it wasn't as it was more caveated, I guess is the way to say it. But now I'm like very much of like just more so the act of doing it and having standards to reference is the positive aspect from doing so. And like you said, I think powerlifters do that extremely well. The other thing I was going to say is kind of to go along with logging is the intangibles that go along with making that logging valid. Yeah. So movement standardization, tempo, just little things like that. How much arch did I have on that chest press when I was doing just little things like that I think go a long way. That you actually could say that in either different direction, because you could argue that a bodybuilder cares a little bit more about the experience of the set, whereas the powerlifter is only cared about the output.
It's a double-edged sword, right?
You could put it in either direction.
I think movement standardization is like a really good thing to experience early in your training career.
Yeah.
Johnny Candido had a video about this where he said he kind of like laid out his like ideal training arc. I can't remember the details of it, but what I mean by training arc is like, okay, you get into lifting in high school, and then basically from that point until you're 40, and then 40 onwards, whatever, maybe you coast. And by the time you get to 40, you're kind of on maintenance mode, and you're just the guy that can be able to do a bunch of physical tasks, and you always have a 6-pack. But basically, the reason I bring that up is I think he mentioned, like he's a big advocate for powerlifting for like that initial chunk of training, and I think a big benefit of that is movement standardization and the efficacy of the log booking, like you just mentioned.
Yep. Yeah. 100%.
Cool. Now let's flip the script a little bit and let's talk about what bodybuilders do well, or folks that are, just focused on maximizing hypertrophy, maximizing body comp, looking yickety yacked. The number one thing for me is they track body composition well. And don't get me wrong, not all physique interested folks do this well. I think a lot of people could do this better. But if there's one thing I could go back and change, because when we started Data-Driven Strength, almost exclusively our clientele were powerlifters. These days, again, it's a little bit more of a mix. But if I could go back to those powerlifters early on, especially the ones that I'm still working with, and I would love to have this data, is just better assessment of body composition through two things. and they're pretty easy. The first is standardized physique photos, both flexed and unflexed photos. You can kind of see different things going on in both of those approaches. And secondly are some easy circumference measurements. You can just get a $2 or $3 tape measure on Amazon, or if you're really balling, you could get a Myo tape, which is a self-tightening tape measure, which does seem to enhance accuracy a notable amount, especially if you're doing the measurements on yourself and you don't have someone to help you out. You could get a handful of sites, so you can do thigh, calf, hip, so basically around the glutes. You could do navel measurement, so around your belly button. You could do, I like to do 2 inches above and 2 inches below navel, chest, and then arm. That's like full suite. But if I'm like, let's just get the easiest, lowest hanging fruit, it would just be a waist measurement. Because especially in males, can be quite sensitive to overall body fat that you have. So tracking body comp, I think, is a massive one that bodybuilders do well, that I think powerlifters would benefit from. Bodybuilders are also put lifestyle variables higher on the list. So they might keep a closer eye on their step count. They probably they're probably a little bit more dialed in with their sleep habits and sleep duration and sleep consistency. And perhaps most importantly, they probably put equal thought into their nutritional approach as they're training, which I think a lot of powerlifters would benefit from. So that might mean just like basic tenets of a good dietary approach, like having lots of fruits and vegetables, good lean sources of protein. But in the from our perspective as strength and hypertrophy coaches, perhaps even more important than that is the changes in body weight over time, the rate of change, the high-level nutritional periodization or body weight periodization approach. I think bodybuilders do that very well on average, that powerlifters could do a little bit better. This is kind of the flip side of something you mentioned before, is I think that a lot of bodybuilders will have less movement standardization.
Do you mean exercises by that?
Yeah. So
for powerlifting, I meant within an exercise.
Okay.
The execution thereof. So I just make sure I understood that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think bodybuilders on average do a really good job, or at least a better job, of not worrying about arbitrary constraints, right? In the example of a competition squat, you have to get to parallel, right? And then you come up. Whereas once you get below parallel, I guess the next objective point would be like hamstrings to calves. But a bodybuilder is probably just going to do what works best for them to train the target muscles. And I think that's a good thing. So they're not really worried about these arbitrary constraints for movement standardization. And instead, they're focused on training the muscle. So a better way to think about that, or a simpler way to think about that, is muscle over movement. Instead of powerlifters focus quite a bit on movement. I think there's pros and cons to each. Again, there is everything's kind of a double-edged sword here, but I think a lot of powerlifters would benefit from their non-squat, bench, deadlift training being less about kind of these random or arbitrary standards, like, touching your chest on touching the bar to your chest on a bench press, or getting to competition depth for deadlift. The last thing that bodybuilders do well that I think powerlifters could benefit from is they listen to their bodies quite a bit, such that, they might be quicker to change exercises or change rep range or change the RPE or add some work or take away some work. So kind of returning to our earlier discussion about structure and rigidity, is they're probably more likely to auto-regulate more than powerlifters do in some ways. We think of powerlifters as auto-regulating because they have a single at 8 and they're going to adjust their load plus or minus 5 kilos. Whereas in actuality, there's probably some bigger auto-regulation levers that powerlifters could learn from. And if you're interested on a longer discussion about kind of the pros and cons of sticking to the program versus not, rewind the podcast quite a bit and you can get that. But I think if you are on the powerlifting side of the spectrum and you listen to what I just said about things bodybuilders do well, I think you're going to benefit from that, and vice versa. If you're a bodybuilder and you listen to what we said about what powerlifters do well, I think you'll benefit as well. Anything to add?
No, I mean the listening to your bodies one was immediately what came to mind, like you said, and in context to our prior conversation about this is just that, I think bodybuilders view things much more conceptually with respect to the training intervention as opposed to exact specific things that need to be hit. Now, like you said, there's a balance to be had with that. Like going in and YOLOing every single session from scratch is not really what I mean. But like you said, if your shoulder's bugging you on a given day, being willing to switch the exercise, switch the rep range, switch the RPE, and keep taking those steps forward, but making the detours as necessary, I think is a skill that powerlifters, because they are so attached to the movements, is something they can probably learn from it. And those are the kind of examples we were talking about earlier, like you said. It's just, understanding that there's a bullseye, and not every single dart needs to be directly hitting the bullseye. Deviating slightly from that might actually be a better way to accumulate the total score, as opposed to the missing darts entirely off the board kind of thing, because you can't adhere to the training long term. So,
well said.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, this will probably take us to the end of the podcast.
Yeah.
Originally, this was supposed to be a couple, segments that we had ideated on, and we're excited to talk about, and then a Q&A.
We got through 2,
but we put it this way: we have plenty of content coming your way, so make sure you're subscribed. If you haven't already, make sure you commented below Hypertrophy Gang, Strength Gang, or both gang, as cringe as that is. But we have an important announcement for the back of the show. And Zach, we've talked about throughout this podcast training skill quite a bit. We've talked about things like, some pretty specific case studies about, someone spending, 9 months of the year in one side of the world and 3 months of the year on the other side of the world. We've talked about, small little tweaks to the microcycle 2 weeks out. We've talked about someone's evolving values and how to kind of be proactive and have ongoing discussions about those, and kind of noticing these patterns across people so you can help other people. So all of that is to say is coaching is a big part of what we do, but it's not the only thing that we do, because we recognize that not everyone wants that, right? Not everyone wants to pay for that because it's not the cheapest thing in the world. And some people want really, really good guidance that we have the technology for, without the direct human involvement, because they want to handle it themselves, and or they want a lower cost option. And we've recognized this for a while. We think there's kind of this underserved market, and we, as a result, have had a product for years now. The first iteration of the product was called Data-Driven Strength Individualized Programming. Then we came out with a second version of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Where we expanded it quite a bit.
DDSIP V2 or 2.0.
V2, 2.0.
Yeah.
And then that evolved into what we called Infinity. When did we release DDSIP? Was that 2021 or 2020?
Yeah, I'd say 2022 is what came to mind for me, but yeah.
It's been a handful of years, and it's something that we have put a lot of love into, just how to think about this problem. And anyway, that evolved into Infinity, and Infinity, we're very, very proud of what that product offered, because it gave a high degree of granularity and customization. You could essentially make any program in the world, but there were sufficient guardrails based on your training goals and what you wanted to prioritize, and ways to kind of push people in that direction, ways to build off of previous programs that they've purchased. And I know you're going to datadrivenstrength.com and about to check out at Infinity, but don't do that quite yet, because we have an important announcement, and that is that we have taken a lot of that logic from Infinity and really another complete redo from the ground up of that programming system. And we've partnered with the folks at Evolve Training App, and we are now part of the team, and we have a fully functioning product that has been really, really kick-ass, and it has improved a lot, and we're very excited about the roadmap to come. So all of that is to say, we now have a mobile app with a lot of our training philosophy into that. And when I say training philosophy, I don't mean training method. I don't mean that, it's going to have Zach Robinson's fancy schmancy protocols of top set of 5 at RP 5.5 to 6.5 in week 1, and then that regresses to RP 4.5 to 5.5 in the next week, and then you have a 2 RP increase. It's not a method. It's not some particular way to train, but it instead is a principle-based programming app with a high degree of flexibility to meet your needs. Currently, there are modes for powerlifting and power building. So if that fits your goals, check it out. Go to evolvetrainingapp.com, make an account. If you sign up for a subscription at evolvetrainingapp.com, you get a longer free trial, and you also get a slightly lower subscription price. The free trial is 14 days long, so plenty of time to try it out for yourself. Again, go to evolvetrainingapp.com, make an account, then download the app and log into your account, and you'll be ready to rock. Alternatively, you can just download the app if you're cool with a slightly higher subscription price there. On the App Store, again, just search Evolve Training App, and it'll show up. We're really excited about what we've built. We've been very involved with beta testers up to this point, and we've had beta testers that are both competitive and non-competitive. We've had beta testers that are preparing for their first meet. We've also had beta testers that are preparing for national or international level meets with great success. So we're really excited about what we've built. We'll have more content coming soon, both through Data Driven Strength and through the Evolve channel. So if you're not already subscribed to Evolve Training App on YouTube, I'd suggest you search it and check it out. I'd also suggest you go to Instagram and look up Evolve Training App, give us a follow there. We have some content coming. Give it a free trial, check it out, see if it's for you. Hopefully you can see a lot of the love that went into it, and you see where this ship is headed, filling this gap in the market that's not designed to replace coaching by any means. In fact, I have a couple of clients that I'm coaching as I normally would, but the front-end delivery of the coaching is through Evolve. Of course, that's not the goal of the product right now, but that just goes to show that the goal of this is to provide really great programming and really great tools for the masses, and we hope that you join us, check it out, give us feedback, and evolve with us on that front. So, Zach, I'm stoked about Evolve. I have a training session after this. I love the rest timers. I love the fact I can quickly see what I hit last week. Some people dig this. Some people it's not for them, which is cool. There's little training journal portions. There's really nice little things that happen when you finish an exercise. The exercise collapses and then it goes back up, and there's a check marks, and it's beautiful. So I'm digging it.
For those Type A kings, baby.
Beta testers are digging it. We have a lot of exciting stuff coming up. We'll talk about it more soon. Zach, do you have anything to add? If not, we can get into a question about Evolve from one of our Instagram followers.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously I echo all the things you said. Extremely excited. I think, I always mention it every time we talk about this in general. It's just we've learned so much about what to do and what not to do for these types of products and services, that I think this happened at the right time for us. I think, the iterations of DDSIP and Infinity were, like you said, I'm proud of what we did there. I think it was a really cool product. We'll, as we're going to talk about here in this next question, probably would do some things slightly differently, which has been reflected in kind of the design of Evolve and kind of our views going forward. So, I'm just incredibly excited. I think there's tons that the app can do now and that are coming on the roadmap that I think are really exciting, and I think it helps, across a variety of spectrum of lifters, like you mentioned. And
it's a really cool team. We have me and you.
Yep.
Kind of, the way the app currently works, because Evolve had its own programming within it before, and that is now still within the app. It's called ArcA. But if you sign up and you're interested in our programming and kind of the main training engine that like the team is actively working on, make sure you select Genesis. That is the training engine that we've helped design. And the best way to think about Genesis is that we're trying to provide structure where you need it and flexibility where you want it. And that actually rings, pretty, that works out pretty well at the end of this podcast, given what preceded it in this podcast, such that it's going to help you adhere to the principles that matter for your goals, but there's also plenty of flexibility. No more downloading a powerlifting app and getting, competition deadlifts on day one, but your day one is done in your basement gym at 5 a.m. while your child is still asleep and you just can't deadlift that day, but you can totally bench. Now you can make that change within the program design feature of the app. And there's a ton of other stuff in there that if you play around with, I think you'll find. I am looking at my upcoming training session and something that we're working on right now. This is currently only an internal beta, but this will be coming to all users soon, is you can easily change the protocols like right there within the session. So it's something we talked about earlier in the podcast is, like
elbows are feeling creaky.
Yeah.
Increase the rep ranges on triceps, stuff like that.
Yeah. And, again, I'm just kind of pointing out some of the small things that I think will show you the level of detail we're thinking about this with is we know that a lot of people on app-based programming without a coach reviewing their footage, they might undershoot a lot of their RPEs. And also, just generally speaking, we think it makes a lot of sense to do the last set of an exercise at a higher RPE. So something we have built into a lot of the programming is last set AMRAPs. Oftentimes, those AMRAPs are to like an RP9 or an RP10. So let's say you had a bunch of sets at RP7, maybe 3 sets at RP7, and then the last set to an RP of 10 or an RP of 9. That AMRAP can help you check your work for the previous sets to see your RP accuracy. And I guarantee you a listener is going to do that, and they're going to be like, oh, I did sets of 10 at RP7, and then I got 20 reps at RP9. Something's off here.
Exactly.
That can go a long way for someone using an app like this. In my case, I train with pretty low volumes right now. I train at high RPEs, so I have last set turned on for everything. Again, that's something we have in internal beta that'll be released to the public shortly. But again, it's just going to be a tool that provides you structure when you need it, flexibility when you want it, and really excited about what's to come. We have a little bit of time here at the end. Do you have anything to add, or you think we just wrap it up?
No, I mean, do you want to even go about the question, or you just want to keep talking high level?
Okay. Shout out to my man, Daniel.
Yeah.
Daniel, we've mentioned a few people that have been with DDS for years. Daniel might be up there with all of them.
Super user.
Because, yeah, he was on DDS IP way on. He was on Infinity. He was on it all the way up through Infinity. And then now I coach him one-on-one, and I've been doing that we've probably been working together for I'd have to look, but definitely over a year, probably a year and a half. He's the man. And he asked us, how is Evolve going to differ from those previous products like Infinity? Zach, I'll let you give us the elevator pitch.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think the biggest thing and the biggest balance that we're trying to strike is I think you can kind of view our journey through these types of products as kind of like that pendulum swing that you mentioned earlier. Initially, early on, the gap in the market that we saw was, hey, there's a lot of template-based programs out there, but they don't have the flexibility on the individual level that somebody may need, whether that's the volumes, the rep ranges, and we were really thinking about it more so from that end of things, the programming, the protocols, the things like that. And while I think a lot of that is coming from a good place, I think with Infinity, we swung even more in that direction. We said, if there is a variable, we want to be able to individualize it. And quite literally, as the name suggests, there were essentially infinite combinations.
Truly
Infinite combinations of those variables, all which had coaching-informed, essentially guardrails to make sure that you didn't get a combination of training variables that wasn't vetted by us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the potential overswing on Infinity is, I think, we had potentially so much flexibility that it essentially detracts from the main principles that I think these apps and these types of services are what's actually going to influence your progress? What is actually going to help you get better results? And I think throughout this process of kind of getting to the next step and getting to evolve and really asking ourselves those questions again from square one, I think we have a much better compass on what things is this product going to help you do to actually get you better results. And we've tried to make the entire design of the app from the ground up with those things in mind, keeping the goal, and not getting potentially sidetracked a little bit with the eye candy of flexibility in places that may be actually detracting from the main goal in the first place. So as you said with the phrase, it is structure where you need it, flexibility where you want it. And that is the overarching principle that we've tried to keep in mind the entire time of what are the things that these types of services are actually going to give you better results. Keep those inside the crosshairs of our development and our focus the entire time, and then giving you flexibility to be able to execute those things at the highest level possible. This is where thinking about training splits, exercise selection, things like that has become, a focus, because those are the things that don't allow people to execute training programs. If I can't, switch the exercises effectively, if I can't switch my split effectively, I literally can't execute the training program. And then giving you flexibility where you want it in terms of the protocols on a given day and things like that, and a lot of other things along the roadmap. So I think from the highest level, I think the philosophy that's different from Evolve and DDSIP is that I think our scope has went from a shotgun to a sniper rifle. I think we know very, very well at this point, having kind of been all over the map with the degree of flexibility and kind of what were we looking to accomplish. I think we have a very, very good handle now on what are the things actually going to give people better results. How do we make sure those are emphasized and better executed from a user interface perspective, and fundamentally just making sure our focus is on the right things and not getting trying pulled in a bunch of different directions to give a ton of flexibility that isn't actually needed, or actually maybe detracting away from the main things in the first place. How does that do?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. It's a sniper approach in terms of like focusing on what matters.
Yeah.
But I think that it's much easier to interact with and get that flexibility where you want it component, because we have better technology, right?
It's more focused and more flexible.
It's more focused and more flexible, right? Like, I have a coach that writes my programming right now, and I'm still using the app to get insights to elevate my training, so I'm basically just putting that programming in the app. For some of the beta testers, I have gone in there and I have drag and dropped the training week around to make it really dialed in based on my experience and what I think this athlete needs. And the app basically takes care of the rest in terms of like load suggestions,
training process,
that sort of thing. And that frees me up to do a little bit more in terms of like some of the softer skills of coaching, some of those other discussions. And then, the things that an app is good and designed to do, it can do. And then, but it's not going to replace a human. It's going to replace the things that should replace a human, and free up humans to do more human things and amplify their work is the way that I think about it.
Let's not get off in an AI tangent.
No, definitely not. But I started talking about the team, and I never finished that.
Yeah, you just said us.
Yeah, so I said us, and then I stopped, so sorry. Me and you, and then we have Kristen Dunsmore on the team as well. So anyone not in the know, she's a very elite powerlifter. And then we also have Garrett Blevins, who is the CEO of Evolve, very accomplished powerlifter, as well as Bryce Lewis as the designer of the app. And anyone that doesn't know those names, look them up. Both extraordinarily accomplished powerlifters, and it's funny that those two were going head-to-head back in the day on the platform, and now they're both part of the same team that we're happy to be a part of as well, and helping to bring a really good tool for lifters to the community. So shout out to all of them, because obviously we're a small part of the team and they make the engine go. So check it out, evolvetrainingapp.com. Let us know what questions you have about Evolve. You can
we'll do more content on it coming up, and that'll definitely be helpful to kind of see what questions people have and help us make better content to show its utility.
Yeah, for sure. So let us know what questions you have about Evolve. Let us know any other questions you have about training, about science, about
rocking chairs.
Yep.
About if anybody's got good suggestions, please put them in the comments.
Yeah.
I would love
if you're a rocking chair connoisseur,
yeah, please.
Maybe just message Zach directly.
No. Put it in the comments. Everybody wants to get a.
Make sure you're subscribed. Yep. Tell a friend about us. We don't do a ton of coaching, so if you inquire, we could have a discussion. We could see if it's a good fit with one of us or another coach. But we'd love to chat, see what you're up to, and see how we can best help you. So follow the links in the description for that. Check out evolvetrainingapp.com. Sign up for the free trial, and we will see you all in the next podcast episode. Peace.